Hey guys, what's up? This is Mike Musiolo. I'm an HF1 practitioner in Manhattan, New York City. I'm coming at you with the Tyranny of Words Part 2. In my first video, we were discussing some of the key takeaways from Stuart Chase's The Tyranny of Words. I was expressing about how important this volume of work is in terms of sociological sensibilities and organization. So now I am going to be going even deeper into that. If you haven't watched Tyranny of Words Part 1, I recommend that you do. You can find it on my Instagram on function.first.fitness in the link in my bio, and it'll take you to my YouTube channel, and there you can find Tyranny of Words Part 1, and then you can move on to this video, Part 2. Okay, so what I'm going to get started with here is the fact that it's called The Tyranny of Words, right? So it sounds like a scary title, but I want to take a moment to make it clear about why Stuart Chase is using the word tyranny, right? Obviously, tyranny of words is a type of metaphor. Words don't necessarily have to rule over our lives, but there are many examples where they have, right? So here's an interesting thing that I want you guys to think about. For example, right here, I have one of the beginnings of Hitler's speeches. And we all know what kind of a bad cat Hitler was, right? I'm going to read it to you out loud right now, and I'm going to see if it makes sense to you inherently. The Aryan fatherland, which has nursed the souls of heroes, calls upon you for the supreme sacrifice, which you, in whom flows heroic blood, will not fail, and which will echo forever down the corridors of history. Okay. Now, I don't know about you, but this sounds like something that the schizoid on the subway would say, right? The Aryan fatherland. What comes to mind when we hear the words Aryan fatherland? We were talking about abstractions in the last video. What Hitler is doing in this speech is he is using abstractions which are very difficult to apply meaning to in order to build an enemy right from scratch. Nations do not have inherent enemies. We are building an enemy from scratch. And then what we are doing is summoning the people of the country to fight against the enemy that he has painted, right? So what's happening here is a use of abstractions in order to distort meaning, right? We were talking about metaphors in the last video. Metaphors can actually be extremely useful. This is an example of metaphors used for evil, right? I'm saying that because even in our current political climate, whether it be Democrat, whether it be Republican, whether it be Libertarian, whatever the case may be, these essences and qualities and abstractions can be used in order to cloud meaning rather than expand meaning, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to this slide behind me here. Now, when we talk about meaning, what do we mean? What's the meaning of meaning, right? It sounds like a deep psychological, philosophical question. It does not have to be. It doesn't have to be at all. Meaning simply implies a check back. What do I mean by check back? Once again, I was saying, when I see whiteboard marker, that's what I was saying in the last video, let's say, when I say pen, right? This is a check back. I have seen pens before. I know what a pen is. You cannot cloud the meaning of what a pen is because I know what it is. I have a check back for that. A check back is synonymous with a reference. Okay? So a reference and check back. It is a reference experience. I know I can refer to this pen and know that there is a cap. I know that it uses ink to write, right? To the hearer's experience. This is very important. The hearer's experience. If I have never seen a pen before, then I can't know what you're talking about. You can describe it to me, and I can try and paint a picture in my mind, but until I see it and experience it, I don't have a way of knowing what it is. To the hearer's experience, to the world. This is the hearer's experience of the world, right? Now, even the world can be taken onto levels that don't necessarily make sense and don't help a lot of people. What I mean that is, we can make it more specific, also known as a shared objective reality. In other words, a reality that we all experience together, okay? When we're talking about reality we experience together, that's why it's important that we're mindful about the words we use. Because if I say something, the words that I'm saying right now are going to influence other people. That's why, that's like the mob mentality, right? It can be used for good or evil. We want to use it for good. This is very obvious. We want to protect ourselves against people who use it for evil purposes. In other words, not for the good of humanity. We want to work towards the good of humanity, okay? Now, metaphors. We're talking about metaphors here. When we're talking about metaphors, metaphors can be useful. Hitler is using metaphors, okay? But he's using them in a way that is clouding meaning, because what he's saying, Aryan fatherland, the souls of heroes, supreme sacrifice, heroic blood, he's saying everything except murdering millions of Jews and gays and black people. Am I not correct? I believe I am. He is saying everything except what is actually happening. This is dangerous. This is why the tyranny of words is important. The tyranny of words. Don't get it twisted, guys. People can use this stuff in order to propagate evil shit. It is extremely important to protect yourselves against this kind of crap, okay? Now, moving on. Metaphors, used in a way that expands meaning rather than clouding it. Metaphors, if used to find common ground, in other words, both parties agree on a reference, which is meaning, then communication may be improved. When you say, you know what I mean, right? You know what I mean. Do I know what you mean? Sometimes we do. Sometimes that's enough. You know what I mean, right? You know what I mean. You know what I'm saying, right? In many instances, we can intuit what these meanings are. That's why metaphors can be useful. For example, if I say something like, everybody should get a piece of the pie. That's a metaphor. It's very clear. We're not literally handing out pie to everybody. It's very obvious. Everyone should get a piece of the pie. What we're saying is that everyone should have their basic needs met, essentially. Everybody should have a part of society's contribution. Everybody should have shared resources. We share resources to an extent. That's not necessarily socialism, communism. I don't want to get too deep into it. However, we will in later videos. But what we're saying is that we can make everybody gets a piece of the pie more and more specific. If we are referring to the same context of what we're talking about. I'm saying everybody getting a piece of the pie. If I'm talking about sociological implications, one can infer that I'm talking about everybody's basic needs being met. So, I want to read to you this brief excerpt from the Tyranny of Words, right? Because we're talking about a shared objective reality, right? So, when we're talking about Hitler, we're talking about how Hitler used this speech in order to propagate murder, right? There's no other way around it. That's what it is. The tendency of organisms is strongly toward survival, not against it. This is straight from Stuart Chase. Something has perverted human survival behavior. I assume that it is a temporary perversion. I assume that it is bound up to some extent with an unconscious misuse of man's most human attributes, thinking, and its tool, language. Okay? So what he's saying is that using words like this can really pervert our survival behavior. It was not in Hitler's best interest to go on a psychotic rampage and cause a world war. Is that good for our shared objective reality? Is it good for humanity as a whole? I don't think so. No. I would say not. Not when there are other ways that we can use our exceptional brains in order to propagate the good for all. Now, I'm going to come back to the basics here. We're talking about the tyranny of words, sociological implications, which I've been talking about, abstractions, and a really important concept in logic called the argument from ignorance. Okay. So let's talk about abstractions first. Okay, abstractions. When we build from the ground up, I have common objects that I can refer to. This is a pen, right? That's very obvious. If I say chair, you guys know what that is. We all hopefully graduated from kindergarten. Even if you didn't, you probably know. When I say dog, you know what I'm referring to. There's not really a chance of that being miscommunicated, correct? Unless I speak a different language, right? Then, the next level, we have clusters, right? When I talk about mankind, how many of you think every single person on Earth? If I say mankind, do I immediately think every single person on Earth? I'm not sure. I just started really thinking like that, but sometimes that can get misconstrued. Mankind, what does that mean? Humanity. Are we referring to every human that's ever existed, right? We have to be as specific as we can. Even with clusters. With common objects, there's not much room for error. The higher we get along these orders of these levels of communication, the more mindful we have to be of what we say, because everything we say is going to influence other humans. Let's talk about Russia, right? Russia. Okay. So Russia can mean a lot of things. If I say Russia and I point to it on a map, I am referring to its geographical location. If I say Russia in terms of a political standpoint, then I'm referring to its government structure, more than likely. Its policies, yeah? Maybe, depending on the context of the conversation. So, however, how many people can say Russia, China, Japan, right? Germany, all these different countries without having some sort of emotional response about it? That's not wrong. It's not wrong. If let's say, the country of Russia has been doing things that are shady, not for the good of humanity, etc., my emotional response should probably be negative. That's not bad. However, before we have that emotional response, we have to make sure that the terms are clearly defined. That's the point of this specific semantics. Maybe when I think of Russia, I think about a friend that's Russian, right? There's a lot of different ways these clusters can be misconstrued, but they can still be useful. When I talk about consumer goods, what am I referring to? Everything that can be consumed, etc., etc. I won't get too much into that. I won't take too much time. What the important aspect is essences and qualities, freedom, individualism, truth. These are all qualities that I would say are typically American terms, right? Not always, but democratic terms, right? So it's not like democracy doesn't have its own issues as well when it comes to language. The thing that happens is when we talk about freedom, it's an abstraction. And what happens is these abstractions are usually defined by another abstraction. So if I say freedom, what does freedom mean? In many instances, someone may say liberty. Freedom is liberty, okay. Well, what's liberty? So you see what happens here? Liberty is freedom. We get into this circular reasoning. Now, in some instances, it's pretty important. Freedom was pretty important to African Americans back in the 1950s and 60s, right? True freedom. They were emancipated, but they did not have the freedoms of basic human rights. That's a little more specific. I could be more specific. They didn't have the freedom to drink in the same water fountains as white people, right? Do you see how these words can propagate insanity, right? We know now that that doesn't make sense, but we're saying that African Americans have freedom. We were saying that they did. They're free. Even now, we're saying they're free. Any African American person can thrive in this country. Now they're completely free. Well, I have a lot of African American people that would disagree with you, right? So that's why we have to be more specific about what these things mean. Or whatever. Why not just define? Like, why not just give everyone their basic rights, right? What are we doing just saying, oh, they have freedom? Well, they don't. It needs to be better defined so that way everybody has the same chance towards survival. That's the point, right? People combat racism on a daily basis. We know that. So that's why freedom is kind of an empty word. It's more defined by our actions, right? What about voter suppression, right? We're talking about freedom, but we have voter suppression going on. That's no good. The people of Flint, Michigan don't have clean water. This is what we're talking about when everyone's basic needs are met, right? Why don't they? Why is it clouded? Why is this so hard to fix? This is where we get into more sociological implications. Because here's the thing. When we talk about evolutionary prioritization, once again, prioritization, for functional patterns, right? This is a community that I'm involved in for fitness and the optimization of human movement. The community typically defines humans being made for walking, running, and throwing on an evolutionary level. There's something I'd like to add to that. We have also evolved for socializing and social organization. If you read *Sapiens*, then it becomes more clear, so I'd recommend reading that. Well, I could do a video on that as well. So, socializing, also Social by Matt Lieberman is very important too, a very important book. We are made for social organization, guys, right? How does any community come together? It comes by communication and socializing. We can't get much done on our own. Humans are powerful. There are a lot of more animals in the animal kingdom that are way stronger, faster, better than us, in many ways physically. The reason why we're the top of the food chain is not, well, walking, running, and throwing definitely has something to do with that, but it's mostly because of teamwork, bro. Teamwork is what really gets it done. Socializing and being able to socialize efficiently and with confidence and with clarity is what makes humans powerful. So that's why we're talking about sociological implications. None of this good stuff can be done alone, singularly. We rely on each other. So, the distrust of words interferes with effective communication. Why do people distrust words? I'll tell you why. It's because of shit like this. It's because somebody's yapping their trap about the Aryan fatherland, and then millions of people die because of it. That's why people don't trust words. That must be changed. If we just have intentions for the good of all, and that's our baseline, then we have a much stronger chance towards true survival. Okay? That's important. We want to trust words. We don't want to distrust words. It is interfering with our ability to socially organize and solve big problems. Very important, okay? So when it comes down to that, now we want to talk about the burden of proof. I'm gonna get into something that was discussed in the last video and that a couple people had a rebuttal against, which I love. That's great. There shouldn't be loopholes in my argument, right? So when we're talking about that, for example, we were talking about light versus the divine, right? Because it said the divine, what comes to mind? We need to have a way to objectively measure what we're talking about, and I was saying that the divine was not measurable. And somebody said, well, light's not measurable. Okay? Well, we have a lot more inferences as to light being measured rather than something such as the divine, right? If I'm referring to light, I know that photons are a part of that. I know that when I flip a switch, something happens every time, unless it short circuits, which I can fix, right? I can't touch it. It is intangible in a way, but something happens every time repeatedly over and over again, right? If I rub two sticks together, I can eventually make fire. It's a little more complicated than that, obviously, but you get what I'm saying, right? I can make fire over and over and over again. I cannot bring about divine miracles on a consistent basis. So here's the thing. This is where it gets tricky. If somebody says to you, well, you can't prove that it's not true, I don't have to. I don't have to prove to you that it's not true. That's what the burden of proof is. If you are saying that the divine exists, it is your job to prove it, not mine. I can give you significant proof that light exists. I highly doubt that you can give me significant proof with an operation over and over and over and over and over and over again that the divine exists. If I take this pencil, or this pen, excuse me, and drop it, it falls. I can do that 30 more times and it will fall every time. If you are going to tell me something about some miracle-based stuff with the divine, if you can do it over and over again as often as I drop this pencil, maybe I'll consider it. But otherwise, these two concepts are not equal in their validity. Ultimately, they are not. So, that is what the argument from ignorance is. The argument from ignorance, which says something about what is being done here, right? One person is arguing that because we don't know, then we are assuming it's true. It is the opposite. Since we don't know at all, we can assume nothing. That is the important aspect of it all, okay? So when we're talking about logistics, this kind of stuff is really important, okay? Now we get into some more relevant questions, things like that. I think that I've covered a lot of stuff here today, so I'm going to go ahead and call it. This was great for me. I hope you guys enjoyed it and found it informative, right? I'm just going to go over a couple of the key takeaways from this particular video. What did we talk about? We talked about what we are made to do as humans on an evolutionary level. Great. We talked about some of the sociological implications about the tyranny of words, right? Why it's important, which we'll continually discuss in later videos. We talked about abstractions again, and we talked about how defining abstractions with abstractions leads to clouded meaning. We talked about how metaphors can be used in order to influence people in a way that is not good for humanity. And we talked about how they can be used positively. Like if I say 100% on my money, that means that I doubled my money, right? 100% on my money, right? Or killing two birds with one stone. That's a very common metaphor. It's very clear. It's very difficult to misconstrue. Metaphors can be good. That's why something like poetry, art, theater, things like that, because sometimes we have trouble figuring out why that's useful in a mechanistic society. It can be extremely useful, right? But only if we use them in a skillful way. We talk about what meaning is, right? We talk about a lot of stuff here. And then one of the more important concepts that we talked about is burden of proof. Burden of proof and argument from ignorance, because that protects you from a logical standpoint against people who have no operation to define what they're talking about. Okay, so that is the end of this video, guys. Once again, hope you enjoyed it. This is Mike Buciolo, HF1 practitioner in New York City. I look forward to making more videos for you guys. please, please, please comment. Find arguments, find loopholes in my logic. I love stuff like that. I think it's the only way that we're going to move forward as a society and make gains is by clearing up clouded communication. If we can all get on the same page, as Stuart Chase says, humans are strongly geared towards survival, not against it. Let's all work towards surviving and thriving together.